Okay, I'm here with Walter Cruttenden of the Binary Research Institute in Newport Beach, California. Walter, tell us a little bit about your background.
Okay, I'm founder of the Binary Research Institute, and we've been working here roughly 10-12 years or so, looking at the cause and consequences of solar system motion. And we're primarily interested in the precession phenomena. The traditional explanation for that is that the sun and the moon acting upon the oblate Earth tend to wobble the Earth. And there's this sort of new idea forming that perhaps some of what we think is the wobble effect is actually due to the entire solar system moving through space. And it's actually a very old idea because ancient cultures talked about this, and they talked about the cycle that it produces. And so that's what we're studying at the Binary Research Institute, sort of the mechanics of that solar system motion. But as a sort of a personal interest, I'm interested in the real idea that the ancients had, that history moves in this vast cycle of time with alternating dark and golden ages. Plato called it the Great Year. And most of us were taught that it's not true, or we're not taught anything at all about it in school. And if it was mentioned as myth and folklore, because it is a common myth, common to over 30 ancient cultures around the world. The ancient Egyptians talked about it, the Mayan, Hopi, the Indians, they call it the Yuga cycle, and of course the Greeks, the Great Year, and they broke it into the Iron, Bronze, Silver, and Golden Age, of which we're also familiar. And so it's a fascinating topic, and we think that this cycle may indeed be caused by the solar system's motion, and that's how the two tie together.
Well, tell us a little bit about how you got into this. What's your background? I mean, what's your studies? How did you get interested in all this when you were a kid? Tell us about how.
Well, when I was a kid, I went to school and was taught sort of the traditional view of history, that it's linear, and therefore anything that came before us must be more primitive. And my mom bought me a lot of books on ancient cities and discoveries that were being made. And you know, as the world's developed, particularly over the last 50 years or so, with so much growth and development, they've been digging up more stuff than ever. And so she was telling me about some of the Mesopotamian finds in Sumer, Akkad, Babylon, which were very advanced. They had underground sewer systems, water systems, indoor heating in some places, and quite an advanced culture in many ways, knowledge of mathematics, knowledge of astronomy. And yet that whole civilization just went to dust, really to nomadic tribes by the time of the Dark Ages. And I'd read the same thing occurred in the whole Indus Valley area in India, and Harappa and Mohenjo-daro, places like this, where they find, again, very advanced cities, underground sewer systems, indoor plumbing and heating. They built with uniform bricks. We still can't even decipher the writing there. They didn't leave as much as was left in Mesopotamia. But it's another civilization that entirely disappeared. And then, of course, we're all familiar with the Greek civilization that went down, Greek and Rome, the Roman Greco. The fabulous ancient Egyptian civilization that was so advanced, and with each dynasty seemed to get worse at what they were doing, until again by the time of the Dark Ages it was virtually nomadic tribes. And the more I read this stuff, the more I didn't believe this linear idea that things just kind of went like this. And I didn't think too much about it as I was starting my career really in business, researching technology, which is what I was in for many years, until I came across the writings of Swami Sri Yukteswar, and he wrote almost a matter-of-factly as just an introduction to a book about something else, that, oh yeah, there's this cycle that's taught in Oriental astronomy, and it's caused by the motion of the sun around another star. And I just thought, wow, there might be a cause for this thing that I'd sort of been seeing in history. And that's really when I decided to leave business, start the Binary Research Institute, and work at it full-time the last 10, 12 years.
Okay, well, tell us, now I know you've written a book called The Lost Star.
Yes.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about this binary system.
So the Lost Star of Myth and Time looks at not only the idea of the ancient cultures, but ties it, as I mentioned, to this system. And so,
tell us what this, so our viewers will know, some dummy like me, what is this system? What is this? Tell us a little bit about the sun and who's its binary.
Well, this is still to be determined. And so we're really looking at the evidence for a binary system at this point. And
now, what's a binary system?
Okay, first of all, a binary system is two stars gravitationally bound that go around a common center of mass. And this was thought to be very rare 100 years ago, and now we know that roughly 2/3 of all stars are in these relationships where they have one or more companions. Actually, it's just more than 60% of nearby sun-like stars, but if you count brown dwarfs and red dwarfs and things like this, then that's when it gets closer to 80%. So I use 2/3 as an average. And the Earth, as defined by Copernicus, has three motions. It spins on its axis, and that's when we see the stars go around us every day. The sun rises in the east, sets in the west. Remember, they used to think during the Dark Ages that the Earth was flat and it couldn't move, nobody could feel it moving, and they could clearly see the sun going around us, so they determined that that's how things worked. And Copernicus came along and said, no, 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 we just see that because the Earth rotates on its axis. So that's motion one. Motion two, Copernicus said, the Earth goes around the sun. And that's why you see a different constellation overhead roughly each month. There's 12 ancient constellations along the ecliptic called the zodiac. There's 12 months, roughly different one overhead each month. And he says it's not because they're going around us, but it's because we're moving around the sun, and that's why you see the sun rise and set on different places on the horizon. He really thought through the process. And he said there's a third motion, and he said that is precession, that the Earth must wobble. And the reason for that, he says, because we see when we look out at the equinox each year, the stars are in a slightly different place. They just move by 50 arc seconds per year. That's 1 degree in 72 years. But he had to explain that, and he had to explain that using a static sun system, because he had just established that the sun is the center of the solar system and will not move. And so he came up with the Earth wobble theory. Newton came along and said, well, if the Earth wobbles, it must be the gravity of the sun and the moon. And it's been worked on for 200 years since then, and they keep tweaking it every 10 or 20 years. And in fact, the Earth does have some wobble, but we're saying it doesn't have enough to produce the entire precession observable.
Wow.
And so that's why we believe it's a telltale sign of our whole solar system moving through space. And in fact, when we've written some papers on this, we've identified a number of other telltale signs, but they're actually even a little more complicated, such as the lack of the planet's angular momentum relative to to their mass or the sun's lack of angular momentum relative to its mass. So there's really pretty good evidence, and indeed if we try to calculate the changes in precession, because it's speeding up slightly each year. In other words, it's not just 50 seconds. That was what it was roughly 200 years ago. Then it was 50.1 arc seconds moving per year. Now 50.2, now it's 50.3. And so, again, we believe this is indicative of a solar system that's moving in an orbit, and it speeds up and it slows down, just as all planets do. They sort of wax and wane, because orbits are elliptical. When they're closer to their gravitational mass, they go faster, and when they're farther away, they go slower. So that's a little explanation. I hope I didn't go too far.
No. So who is, if we're in a binary, who's the other star?
Well, there's some people that are looking one direction, and then others looking in another direction. So there's two schools of thought. One is it's a brown dwarf, black hole, some planet-like mass, very difficult to see, maybe even towards the galactic center where it's a little noisier than other directions. And there are people that are taking this very seriously and doing this work, such as Mike Brown at Caltech. He's found a lot of the dwarf planets. Matter of fact, he's the guy that supposedly killed Pluto because he found so many objects, Kuiper Belt objects, that were almost as big or one slightly bigger than Pluto. And so that's one school of thought. Another school of thought is that perhaps we don't understand everything there is to understand about motion beyond our solar system. There's a lot of indications we don't, because of the need to use dark energy or dark matter to explain most of the universe. And so there's some people that's saying perhaps the solar system's moving faster than we think it is, and in which case we could be going around a nearby visible star producing this cycle. And the more I looked at the evidence, the more I kind of lean in that direction. But I'll be the first to say that the evidence is still out, and there's a lot of work that needs to be done on both schools of thought.
So now, you meant, is it that the star Sirius? Is that our binary?
Well, some are looking at that, or its direct opposite, which is Barnard's star, the fastest moving star in the sky. But yeah, there's a lot of reasons to think it might be Sirius, and I know most of your traditional astronomers would sort of scoff at this idea, because Sirius is not the closest star. It's the largest mass in our local neighborhood, and it's not too far off plane from our solar systems. In other words, Pluto would be roughly in line with Sirius if you were to plot a line from our system to Sirius. But it requires that the solar system be moving faster than most think it is. And I think there's some reasons why you could be gravitationally bound to the Sirius system, which itself has a white dwarf in it, which is, again, the only one in local space, unless you go out as far as Procyon. And so that's one thing we're looking at. It's interesting that many ancient cultures themselves revered Sirius. The Shinto religion out of Japan called it our second sun and aligned their temples with it. I mean, they were very explicit about it. The Egyptians, again, built some temples to Sirius, and they called Sirius Isis. And Sirius definitely had a relationship with Horus. You can see in a lot of the ancient glyphs.
Now, was one of the shafts of the pyramid, is that pointing, of the Great Pyramid, is that pointing to Sirius?
Yes, it is. I think it's the southern shaft of the Queen's Chamber. Now, a lot of people would say, well, that's just a coincidence in our lifetime, and it will move. But I'm not so certain as that, because Sirius has this odd characteristic of sort of moving along with the sun in spite of precession. And that's kind of exactly what you'd expect if you were in a gravitational relationship. I think I talk about that in chapter 6 or so of Lost Star.
Of Lost Star, yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, there's a lot of little things that point to it that cumulatively say we should really do some research there. And so more people are.
So this is, in other words, this is not in line with your normal astronomers about our sun being in a binary system.
No. I mean, of course, astronomy.
Are people Are those same people scoffing at you in this idea about a binary system?
You know, I've had very civil discussions with a lot of astronomers, and most of them would say that, you know, they really don't study precession. They study, you know, plasma physics or black holes or, you know, dark matter or something. It's really kind of an arcane field to study, and so, you know, if part of the precession observable is due to our whole solar system motion, it really takes a study of you know, basic mechanics. You kind of have to go back there, so it's not a very popular field by any means, but there are some that are looking at it, and I think as more people begin to understand this research, you'll see more serious study.
So just for a quick thing on precession, for those people who don't know, what is precession? Okay,
so we talked about the daily motion. You see the sun rise in the east and set in the west. That's one observable. We talked about the yearly motion, seeing different constellations overhead. So precession, from our point of view, what we observe is that on each equinox, you know, let's say you were just looking at sunrise from the same stones, you know, something, so you're certain you're looking in the same position each year. Over a lifetime, you would notice that the sun has moved position across the constellation, across the stars in the background by a degree, which means over roughly 2,000 years, it would have gone completely through a constellation. And so this longer-term view of precession is this phenomena where the sun was 2,000 years ago in Aries, and then most of these last 2,000 years in Pisces, and now it's at the dawning of the age of Aquarius. The sun actually moves. But Copernicus couldn't say that it moved, and so he had to come up with a completely different reason.
Wow. Well, you know, I just understand you just wrote a new book.
Yeah. This one is it's The Great Year Adventures with Tommy the Time Traveling Turtle. So it's actually this topic broken down into just a fun little story for kids.
Wow.
And I have 5 grandkids, so
explain
fun to do.
What's the Great Year? What does that mean?
So the Great Year is this cycle of where the sun will move through the signs of the zodiac.
Precession. This is another...
Right, one precession cycle. And it takes roughly 24,000 years, so roughly 2,000 years through each constellation along the way. And according to myth and folklore, the Earth goes through complete internal and external changes through this time period. And you know, traditional scientists will agree with a portion of that. You know, you go from ice age to warmer ages and back again, and certainly civilization goes through big changes. But the ancients would actually say, you know, you go through this very material age when mankind only believes in that which he can touch and smell and pick up through the senses.
And is that the age we are in? Pisces? Would you call Pisces that age?
Age we're just coming out of. You call that the Iron Age. The Indians call it the Kali Yuga. And then going into the Bronze Age, or Dwapara Yuga in Indian terms, where mankind begins to gain knowledge of finer forces, you know, electricity, magnetism, realizes that stuff isn't so solid as we thought, you know, that it's made of molecules, and by golly, those are made of atoms, and those are made of energy. And so that's the discoveries outwardly in this age. We entered it around the Renaissance, are all about that sort of thing. And our perceptions will grow greater and greater as we become more and more aware of what this world is, what we really are, through the next couple thousand years. And then supposedly we go into the Silver Age, or Treta Yuga, the Age of Mind, and then the Golden Age, the Satya Yuga. The Greeks also called it the Age of Man, the Age of the Hero, the Age of the Demigods, and the Age of the Gods, which is sort of indicative of the characteristics that are displayed during these different vast ages.
Now, I know in years past this is not usually on the curriculum of public schools, but of course, evidently, what you just said, that things are changing. You've already started. Public schools have invited you to start.
Yeah. More and more people are open to these ideas. Who's to say that just as certain areas are influenced by their environment, that the Earth isn't also influenced as it moves through space. And so it could well be. And yeah, I think we don't come in and teach this as gospel or anything. All we talk about is let's explore these ideas the ancients believed in, and let's see if there's any scientific basis to take them seriously. And that's where we are now.
Okay, something I didn't learn is almost closing this session up. Something I didn't learn is that that I was found out is, like you just said, our sun and our whole solar system is moving through the universe, isn't it? And is it moving really fast? I mean,
well, it has multiple motions, and generally, when you go on a larger and larger scale, the speeds are increasingly higher. So. Just as the Earth, our motion relative to the center of the Earth is roughly 1,000 miles an hour, because the Earth is roughly 24,000 miles in circumference, and it takes 24 hours to spin around once. Yet the Earth, as it goes around the sun, is moving 66,000 miles per hour.
What?
Well, likewise,
the Earth is moving that fast in our universe?
Just around the sun. And so the whole solar system, if it moves around another star, is probably moving at a multiple of that. And solar system speed is something that's a little difficult to calculate, because it's compared to what? Everything else is moving too.
Right.
So there's some variation in that. One of the best measurements I've seen is relative to the CMB, and that is comes out at about over 400 kilometers a second.
Wow.
And so, there's a motion around the galactic center too. So hopefully, if we're going around another body, that takes some time, and then that whole body might be going around a stellar neighborhood, and then that whole thing may be going around the galaxy. And we know the galaxies are spreading out from each other at a very rapid speed, so there's a lot of motions going on.
Wow. So I would say Earth and Sun are speed racers out there.
That's it. And that's why Tommy, the time-traveling turtle, came from outer space to check it out, and he tells all about this in The Great Year Adventures.
Well, Walter, I want to thank you so much for your time. Is there a website on this Binary Institute if somebody wants to check you out?
BinaryResearchInstitute.org is the best place to see it, or just Google The Great Year Adventures, and you can see a short little video on Tommy.
Thank you so much.
Okay.